Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone, based on your time zone. Welcome in Salesforce Apex Hour. My name is Amit Chaudhary. I'm your host and the founder of the Apex Hour. And today we have a very interesting topic that's 9 stages of identity and access management lifecycle. And we have a great speaker, Dipankar Jyoti, with us. And I will not going to take too much time over here. Let me hand over for Dipankar for his introduction and the presentation. Dipankar, over to you.
Thank you, Amit, and even more for giving me the opportunity to present today. This is my first presentation in Apex Hours, and I've been a follower of Apex Hours. Sorry. This is my first session in Apex Hours, so really thank you for that. Without further ado, a little bit about me. My name is Dipankar. I go by DJ. I'm currently the associate partner at IBM, the global Salesforce practice. I manage their Salesforce-based assets, accelerators, and solutions globally. I'm a certified Salesforce system and application architect, along with 13 other Salesforce certifications and 10 non-Salesforce cloud certifications, such as AWS, Google, blockchain. I'm also the author of the online blog called cloudmixdj.com, which is mainly a forum dedicated to cloud architecture concepts. I also recently co-authored a book with my dear friend, Jim Hutcherson. A big shout out to him as well, as a lot of the content I'll cover here is a huge contribution from him. And then this book is called The Salesforce Architect's Handbook. It's available on Amazon.com. Most of the content that I'll present today is covered in the book at a more granular level. Today, we'll keep it at a high level because of the time constraint. In 1 hour covering 60 pages of identity and access management chapter of the Salesforce Architect's Handbook is going to be difficult. But if you like today's presentation and want more detail, I would just recommend this book might be a good option. Also, in addition to that, if you wanted to reach out to me, the best place to reach out to me is really on LinkedIn, and that's my LinkedIn handle. With that said, let's take a quick look at today's agenda. I'll be introducing what is the idea behind these 9 stages of identity and access management, and covering the identity and access management from an architect's point of view. And we will cover these key concepts, where the key identity and access management concepts within each stage of these 9 stages. Don't worry if you're not sure what these 9 stages are or are confused. What does even stages mean in identity and access management? We'll go through all of that. What we'll not cover in this are developer or admin level details, hands-on configuration of any Salesforce features and so forth. Also, I've oftentimes, whenever I shared this topic, a lot of people have said, no, that feature is not clicked this way and that way. I agree with you, first of all. But my intent over here is to create an architectural mindset for you when you're designing a scalable identity and access management solution within Salesforce. And what does it take? And why is it important? And why, what else do you need to do with it? The presentation is absolutely intended for architects and provides architectural framework. Also, I would request you to kindly stay on mute during the presentation, post your questions in the chat, and we'll definitely try to address that. And if I don't address that immediately, you have my LinkedIn, you can message me there. With all of that said, let's get started with a personal story that I want to share with you before I get into the nitty-gritty of identity access management. Recently, actually not recently, pre-COVID, I was traveling to my favorite destination in the world, which is Barcelona, Spain, from DC. And the whole experience started somewhat like this. I booked a flight on Expedia.com. I didn't have an account in Expedia, so I essentially, Amit, I'm guessing you will admit the folks. I shouldn't worry about this, right? Okay.
Yep.
I started with the step 1. I started with booking a flight on Expedia. I didn't have an Expedia account, so I created a new user account, registered myself, did all of the registration and so forth. They gave me a confirmation. That's it. And then on the day of the flight, I show up at the airport, the right airport. Washington has, of course, 3 airports like any other city. So I wanted to make sure I wasn't driving towards the wrong airport. Checked in at the counter, got a boarding pass. Then I quickly ran to the security. In the security, I had TSA pre-check. I saw this big line, but I went with the TSA pre-check. So had different ways in which I could pass security. And then I was able to pass through security. I had access to the entire terminal. And then eventually, of course, locating the departure gate. Once I located the departure gate at this particular point, nobody was asking me for ID or ID, any identification or any like whether I should be in the terminal or anything as such, which was very comforting for me because I just went through the security process where I had to show my passport, my visa, all of these things, as you all know. And then once I kind of got through the boarding gates, as I was in the plane, the doors were shut and essentially the flight was on its way. And I was in a secure capsule for 6.5 hours, probably a little bit more. But also one of the things was that I took a multi-flight airline. So now I forget which airlines they were, but like, let's say it was United and Delta. So essentially I had a stopover in Heathrow. I switched over, actually it was, sorry, anyways, Iberia, I think. But anyways, I stopped over at Heathrow. One of the key cool features that I liked about that was that when I got into Heathrow, I didn't have to go through the security gates again, show my visa, show my passport, show all of these different things. I just walked from one gate to another and seamlessly accessed the next flight and got through. Once I reached Barcelona, I was seeing this exit terminal and I saw that it was saying like, beyond this point, there is no entry, re-entry. And I was very cautious before I left the terminal because I was like, once I leave this, I won't be able to get back. So, just wanted to make sure like I got all my work done and got out of it. And then lastly, like when I was returning back, I was making some adjustments to my return trip. I wanted to stay a little bit longer. I wanted to change, like, I wanted to see if like I could get an upgrade for my flight and other things. I did all of that. And, and I kind of got back to DC. When I got back to DC, eventually I wanted to see like if I could go back into the terminal because I wanted to eat something within the terminal, but I had already left the terminal. And what I quickly realized was that my flight access was removed. Like I wasn't able to get anywhere. It wasn't permitting me to do anything. Now, while I say this, there's nothing unique about this experience. You've all gone through this, but I wanted to kind of really highlight some of the experiences I had because that is very relevant to our identity and access management. From when I was thinking about this process from end to end, I was realizing this level of security that was embedded in each step of the process, the convenience that I was getting in terms of like not showing my identity and access at the wrong time. And kind of when I was even changing the flight, I don't want to do anything. Like it was just so well coordinated. And there were also a lot of good guardrails, like when I couldn't get back into the terminal because my flight was complete, right? So those kind of ideas, really sparked the idea of if you were the architect asked to design the security features of an airport security for an airport that is coming right beside your house, what would you do? Where would you even start? You probably need to start by asking yourself, what kind of a problem is this? Is this an issue with identity? Is this an issue with access for passengers? Is it this issue overall about security? Or is it all of the above? Keeping that in mind, let's go to the next piece. I'm going to now talk about identity and access management. Just keep the other part in mind because as an architect, you have to modularize your thought process. You cannot get overwhelmed and jump into identity and access management willy-nilly. When I was looking at the identity and access management buzzwords out there were over, I think like 60, and that was only a Google search, and it just was giving me like over 60 topics that itself had like granular level details. But when you kind of modularize that and identify what are you doing, you'll start realizing a pattern. And the pattern that me and Jim Hutcherson, who's the co-author, saw this was that there are really 9 stages, especially for Salesforce. And of course, this applies to many other platforms too, but Salesforce, which need to be addressed by an architect when designing a scalable solution for identity and access management. The first one is user provisioning. How do you register the user? How does the system even know that somebody who is a user and wants access to the system? This is something that I'll cover later on. The second one is access definition. The third one is authentication. Fourth one is authorization. Fifth one is session management. Sixth one is single sign-on capabilities. 7 is logout and redirects. 8 is user account management, and 9 is deprovisioning. And we'll go into each one of this. So even if you're still like, DJ, what does that mean? We'll get there, But I want to tie this back to the travel architecture, right? The security in the airport. When I was booking the flight, and I said, like, I created a new account, and based on the new account, they make sure that by creating that new account, I'm only registered to access the airport in Washington Dulles Airport and not any other airport, and for the flight that is Delta, and for a particular seat that is not business class, that is economy class, because otherwise imagine like everybody will show up with a economy class and get into the business class. So all of those kind of things were done there. There was a huge, actually, and I kind of butchered it a little bit, but basically after creating the account, the second part is the access definition, which is where like they identified that DJ is an economy class guy. He will have access to this. He also has TSA security pre-check. So they added that into my account when I was booking the flight and so forth. And there was an access definition aspect of it, right? We'll get into what that means. And this is related to the check-in and boarding pass when I got that. And, they clearly knew what I needed to do, even before I could know what I needed to do. When I was passing security, they wanted to verify a couple of different things, which is related to authentication. Authentication is the process of two things. The context that you are in the right place at the right time, and the second is who are you? Which I was validating with my passport and other things. Then it's authorization, which is locating the departure gate. This is the place where I'm entering into my session or my airplane. And essentially, really, what is the scope of of my access and other things? We'll double click a little bit more on authentication, authorization, all of this stuff. The in-flight experience, very similar to a session that gets created within Salesforce. Once you are in flight with all of your authentication access and user provisioning and other things, this is where you're really doing your work. This is where the entire experience is getting generated solely and customized for you. And then later on, when I was changing the flight, it is similar to single sign-on. It was controlled by Heathrow Airport. The airlines were providing a service, and Heathrow Airport was managing my identity and ensuring that I was within a particular space to get access to the next flight. And how do I kind of get an overall holistic access to both the flights so that I get the full experience without logging in, logging out or in this case, going through security again. Then of course, exit terminal and no reentry. This is when you would consider like a logout, and where does it redirect? Meaning that when I logged out of Barcelona airport, I was in Barcelona. When I logged out of Washington, DC, I was in Washington, DC, and I never logged out of Heathrow Airport. So I was still in the session. So those are the kind of things. Lastly, when I user account management, this is where I was making adjustments to my trip. I wanted additional access. I wanted other things and those kind of things. And the last one is when I reached back home and I was trying to access, before I kind of got into my car, I tried to access the airport. I couldn't get back in. And that's the deprovisioning of it. They had deprovisioned me. My booking with Expedia was done and complete, and there's nothing more they could do about it, or airport could do about it, or Delta Airlines could do about it, right? So let's double click more on each of these because these are really what I consider the 9 stages that one would consider for, yeah. So when you're doing user provisioning, this is where you're creating a user for the first time, or the user themselves are creating, you're allowing the users to create themselves in the system. What are some of the users, first of all, that you want to provide access to. And the provisioning of user access depends on whether you are an internal user or an external user. There are different mechanisms within Salesforce that for provisioning of that. In the internal user aspect of thing, you're doing a manual provisioning, which can be done by an administrator or user manually, a delegated admin and so forth. The API provisioning, which is provisioned through API, you can do programmatically. You can also do just-in-time provisioning with SAML, which is essentially, which is basically connected with a SSO or other identity provider that provides a SAML assertion. And we'll talk about SAML in a little bit. And you can do all of that. You can also do mass provisioning. And then there are some products of Salesforce, such as Identity Connect, that have those provisioning capabilities as well. But however, Identity Connect, of course, always only works with Microsoft Active Directory, and you want to ensure that if that's the choice of your identity provider, then you could always go for Identity Connect as well. From an external standpoint, again, a manual setup that could be possible with admins. There is also self-registration capability, and then there is social provisioning, which is essentially through the OpenID Connect, which uses OAuth framework to log in. And we'll go a little bit into OAuth and OpenID Connect as well. But these are some of the options, and you want to consider how they're getting in, what they're, who they are. But the key part is internal versus external when it comes down to user provisioning. So keep that in mind. From a setup perspective, access definition. Many people call this, for example, access policies, access scope, and not exactly access scope because that has its own, it mixes up with OAuth scope, but like there are multiple different, but it's really about before a user can go into Salesforce, you need to set up quite a few things. What license will the users have? What profiles will the users have? What permission sets? Are you going to use role hierarchy? And if you're going to use role hierarchy, will the users be sitting in what role hierarchy and so forth? Then there are all these other things like, hey, beyond all of this stuff, I need to have some sharing rules that will impact the user, queue membership, group membership, team membership. There are 16 ways in which you can provision access to a user before even the user logs in. Now, of course, I say 16 on the web. There are 22. I've even seen somewhere where they say like 48. This is what they refer to as visibility and sharing in Salesforce. And essentially, where I'm going with this is that when it is user-centric access, I'm calling that scope of work or the stage as access definition. And this has to happen. Can you imagine like you get access to Salesforce as an admin and then you keep adding every user as an admin? You can't have that happen, right? This is what prevents that and makes sure that the right people have the right access. The next one is authentication. When we talk about authentication, as I was mentioning, it is about two things. The context of the user. Are they in the right place, right time, right things, right IP address? So when we talk about domain access, are they in the right domain? Salesforce is a multi-tenant architecture. There are multiple pods servicing different folks through unique namespaces and others. And essentially, you need to make sure that when you're logging in, just because it's multi-tenant, one login won't work with the other, right? Unless you have things set up between the two orgs. IP policies. A lot of people don't think about that. Do you want to restrict any IP, internal, external, and so forth? The login hours. These are the operating hours, just like a restaurant. You can show up at a restaurant, but then eventually if the restaurant's not open, your coupon or your gift card wouldn't work because the login hours are not there. And assurance level. Is it a high assurance level or a low assurance level? And how you can do that, how you can manage that with multi-factor authentication. Or the two-factor authentication, or any kind of all of those capabilities, which create a more secure session for you, and how you can manage that. The second part about authentication is identification, and in identification, these are the three frameworks that Salesforce. Well, I should say Salesforce acknowledges. One is, of course, the username password framework. The other one is a SAML, which SAML is an XML-based framework for exchanging security information between, between the two systems. One is an identity provider, another one is a service provider, some of which you'll also again see when we go a little bit more into SSO settings. SAML is typically a framework utilized along with the setup of SSO. And then there is OpenID Connect, which is essentially the OpenID Connect is a unique one. It essentially uses a user-based tokenized approach to solve for two things: authentication and authorization. And it is a mechanism for authentication. It is also a mechanism for authorization, and we'll kind of connect to that. Authorization. Before I kind of go into authorization, many of you, or at least some of you, are wondering, hey, both start with A. What does that even mean? What's the big difference? I want to kind of quickly take a step and kind of give a quick example of this. Imagine when I went to Barcelona, I wanted to check into the hotel. The first thing they did was like, they said like, hey, can I get a passport or some kind of an identifier? They didn't even tell me like which room I am in, what I am doing, what not, everything. I gave them the ID, they looked at it, they gave me back the ID. Then they said they located my reservation, which is the authorization access, which is the piece that where authorization starts, sorry. And essentially after that, they provided me a key card, which in Salesforce is the access token. And with that key card now, until the key card was active, I was able to get into any room. So authentication is the fact where like I was in the lobby and I was verifying myself, but they gave me a key card, which is like an access token, which gives me the authority to access my exact room, not any other room, as well as some shared capabilities. Like they had a lobby on the 7th floor with a terrace and happy hours and stuff. And also even at that, it wasn't the same key card was not opening up access to that lobby for others, just for me, because they said like, hey, this is something that only you get, right? So it's that kind of a concept between authentication and authorization. Just keep that in mind. But in authorization, as I was mentioning, there are two key ways in which you can do authorization: OpenID Connect and OAuth 2.0. Now, many are cringing in their seats saying, hey, OpenID Connect also uses OAuth. So why are you keeping it separate? Well, OpenID Connect, when you use it as a framework, it does both. Authentication and authorization. You can't separate like saying, oh, I'll just do OAuth with OpenID Connect. That's the reason why when you go with OpenID Connect, you're going with the entire stream of that. It's a token-based authentication plus authorization and does the OAuth. Social sign-on, such as authenticating yourself via LinkedIn, Google, Facebook, others into the system, is the social sign-on, which uses OpenID Connect framework. On the OAuth side, we have OAuth is the framework where it is the interaction between you as a user, between you as a user and the system acting on behalf of you with either other systems or granting you access within the system in a secure manner. And there are 13 OAuth flows. For all of the 13 OAuth flows, for a description of it, you go into my book. But if you want a hands-on and other things, there is there are great sessions on Apex Hours. I would highly, highly recommend going through each of those OAuth flows. Then there are also in authorization process, there are authorization scopes. And there are at least 10 authorization scope that you can specify, saying when I'm using this OAuth flow, this is the level of authorization scope that I want to provide. Like I was mentioning about the key card giving me access to my room, to the gym that everybody has access to, and then to a happy hour lobby where only I have access, but some of my friends didn't have access to, right? So those kind of things is the authorization scope. When we talk about after authorization, oops, maybe did I skip just 1 second? After authorization, as I was kind of mentioning, like I was at the boarding gate in the airport situation, they got me into the flight. Session is a secure capsule, session is an application state within which, and it is time bound, within which you are given a secure area to work with your authorization scope and ensure that the activities that you want to pursue within Salesforce are available to you as a resource to operate on and then essentially execute on. And as long as that time period is live, you get to operate on the system and do what you needed to do. It will only allow you for that, and it is, and during those period, you don't do anything else. In solutions like, and by the way, the duration of the flight, where, or in this case, the duration of your session is a session state, which contains all the data related to your identification, your authorization, your authentication mechanism, and all of those things. The session duration can be also automatically extended through a refresh token. So there are different kind of mechanisms. I won't go into that because that has its own separate topics that you can have. But in a session, I want to kind of also mention there are 23 different types of sessions that get created within Salesforce, or you can create different sessions. API related, API only users related, Aura component related, chatter, and so forth. And you can see all of these over here. But these are the different kind of sessions that have different kind of scope, and they have different kind of access parameters that allow you to do different things in a different context of the user and the technology that you're using. We were also talking about single sign-on, the experience where I was in Heathrow Airport, and I wanted to go in from one flight, which was by Delta, and the other one by Iberia, or the one that I don't remember. I was mentioning how an airport was ensuring that my identity of who I am and what flight I can take was managed by them. Yes, I had an access token to access the next flight, but the identity and authorization scope was still maintained by Heathrow Airport. It's very similar in the SSO. SSO, the best way to think about it is that Salesforce is essentially managing the, okay, let me back up a second. In Salesforce, actually in SSO, there are two parties, or two key parties. Actually, there are three parties: identity provider, service provider, and the resource provider. And the resource provider is typically like where you're accessing the resources and others. The single sign-on is the idea where there is an external system, a centralized system that's trying to get you access to multiple systems within your organization, such that you have a seamless experience across all the different systems, because essentially the system only cares about your identity and authorization in each of the systems, but doesn't really care about you requiring to log in again and again. And also, it's a bad experience. So that's the other thing. There are two types of SSO flows that you need to be aware of in that. One is the identity provider initiated flow, where you are logging into something like Okta, and then Okta says, oh, are you trying to go to Salesforce? Are you trying to go to SAP? Or are you trying to go to other things? And then essentially kind of routes you to the right application that you want to access. And there's a little bit of a, whenever I say flow, this is the dance that happens in getting you through your identity, access definition, authorization, all of those things validated real time in the context of the scope of the access that you're trying to gain within the service provider who holds the resource access, right? And so when we're talking about that, we're talking about the identity provider kind of saying, I'm going to route you and what it is. On the service provider side, this is very similar to like when you get a direct access into Salesforce, like a link that gets sent to you. For example, when you logged into this meeting, you clicked on a link, then Zoom said, hey, can you give me all your details? Because you just clicked on a link. It sent you to an identity provider service within Zoom itself. And then now it brings you back to this meeting. You are in this meeting and you have only access to this meeting. And that's kind of like the way the SP initiated flow works. Being familiar with these flows is very important in essence, because then you have different aspects that you can consider and you can go through. The next one, logouts and redirects. So, when we talk about logouts and redirects, there are three different approaches that at least, now there might be more, by the way, in terms of like Salesforce is always ever evolving and they're coming out with new items and so forth. So, but the three that I kind of definitely wanted to point out, which I could frame together in a group, is user initiated, system initiated on the right side, and in the middle that you have is single logout. First, user initiated. When it's a user initiated, it could be the running user saying, look, I mean, I want to get out, or admin user initiated, which is like your admin is throwing you out. But admin user initiated, oftentimes what happens is they will log in as you, and then they will log you out. Those kind of capabilities. This is also, in the airport situation, if like somebody wanted to throw me out of the terminal so that I don't overstay my luxury in the airport, they could do that. Some officials could do that. So that's similar to that. User initiated logout from IDP. So when you're in Okta and or any other of these identity provider services, you can also initiate a logout from there. Then it will do a kind of a API call, make or even a SAML assertion, and ensure that you're logged out of the other system. System initiated is typically when there is a session timeout, or if there is in the mid use of your system, there's a deactivation of your access. And then, of course, there are some login policies where like you didn't meet your IP requirements or login hours and other things upon refresh and so forth. And I won't get into this administrator certification things, but from an admin perspective, that those are some of the things that you would want to consider. And an architect also needs to think about like, is there a possibility when there is a global access defined with different time zones, do the login hours, login policies really still make sense? So that's something that also an architect needs to consider. Single logout is the feature which is the antonym to single sign-on. So there is a single log out. Typically what happens is that, when you build integrations, you create sessions within sessions within sessions across multiple systems, especially when you have a SSO on. So it could be that you actually closed out your browser, but because your SSO session is still on, you're still logged on. So if somebody after you opens up the browser and goes into Salesforce with your computer, they could log in because your SSO solution is still thinking that, or the identity provider is still thinking that you need access and you don't want to log in. So this is the part where like, you can have a single click to log out of your SSO session, which is like basically telling your identity provider, please log me out of every system in one click, and please secure me and get me out of here. This could be IDP initiated. This could be SP initiated, where there's a click where you say like, hey, if I log out in Salesforce, log me out of all the other systems. It could also be OpenID Connect initiated, which is like basically in single sign-on, or actually, well, technically, this is the product, sorry. Well, all I can say is that basically, if you are connecting your SSO settings for your as a single sign-on or social sign-on, then that's using the OpenID Connect, and that's what essentially is logging you out as well of any other systems that you're logging. So logging out of your LinkedIn profile and other things, and then trying to get access to it, it won't work if you have a single sign-on setup. User account management. When I kind of think about, and that this should say user account management. Sorry for my typo over here. Please don't excuse that part. But when it comes down to it, user account management, they say, oh, is that just like creating profiles and permission sets and giving access? No, it's a little bit more than that. And you have to, as an architect, really think about this in a clear and concise manner, because this is going to be key. You may start off with 1 user, 5 users, 10 users, but over the period of the entire application life, which could be anywhere from 3 years to 5 years to, as you know, there are some that are 20, 30 years later. What challenges this brings in is that because you didn't start with a clean user account management framework, now the user account management itself needs an army to maintain. So in essence, you should design this within your architecture as to how they will do it. It has 3 different aspects. User access changes, which is essentially like, okay, I want to change profile permission sets. And also it should be a little bit more abstracted level, so that you're not making changes to the profile, but you have significant amount of considerations of which should be profile, what should be permission sets, and so forth. Salesforce also has permission set groups, which allows you to now again abstract out the permission sets and the discrete access to different items together grouped in one permission set group umbrella. You can freeze, mute, do all of these things with that. Another one, user access changes that not many people think about is role hierarchy changes, when essentially you're changing that and what happens to the user's access. They are able to see something, now they can't. The sharing rules, other things, a lot of impact happens. So Do you allow an admin to just make willy-nilly role hierarchy changes? That's a key consideration that you have to think about. The other part is lockout recovery, right? Yeah, in a small organization, you email your admin saying, hey, can you please reset my password? How many times do we do that, right? But in the real operational world, imagine millions of users, and you want a lockout recovery process that is seamless and automated, rather than like opening up a case, or even where would you even open up the case to get access and so forth. So you have to kind of automate that. A lot of people don't automate it, and then there's that frustration from user that I can't get my user access done. The other one is like freeze and unfreeze users. This is typically around the maintenance period, like when you're doing maintenance of your systems, upgrading, rollouts, other things. Do you deactivate all your users? Do you send out an email to saying, hey, please don't log in to this time because there's maintenance? Yeah, you can put all that stuff, but who's going to listen? And how do you ensure? So you can do freeze, unfreeze users, which is a temporary disablement for like users to be able to log in. The other one that nobody considers, IP whitelisting. Oftentimes they'll be like, hey, this other system is trying to access this, or or any other, you're logging in from a different IP, or any of these issues. How do you ensure that that IP is a secure IP from where you are expecting somebody to log in, and do that whitelisting? Because oftentimes you'll keep resetting people's password, but realize that IP whitelisting is the issue, and you need to solve for that. Group membership. So user access, lockout, great. DJ, I'm done. No, you're not. Group membership. This is also key. Which public groups do you give access to? Is it giving additional access that is not intended for? Is it temporary or is it permanent? Queues. Should people be able to see other things that you're working on, or have there's pros and cons of all of that. So all of those kind of things. Then team membership. Do you want to give an account team level access and make somebody a team member of account, or opportunity, or case team? What is that? At which level does which user need to get access to and be part of the default team membership? Or if they ask you for access, how do you define what team membership do you need to make them a part of? So those kind of details, right? Deprovisioning. Now again, over here, there are 3 different ways: admin initiated, remote system initiated, and self-deactivation. Admin initiated is when, by the way, you can't delete any user out of Salesforce, as you know. You can only deactivate them. When you're deactivating them, there are also other considerations to think about, which is ownership transfer. You will also have to ensure that any of the users are not part of any kind of process builder automation piece, or they have any email alert, workflow email alerts kind of recipients. You have to ensure that they are removed from that. Otherwise, they will start having challenges. Then also from a community and partner portal deactivation, if they're admins of those communities and partner portals, then and there are other users other than the admin, then you can't immediately deactivate. There's a dependency created immediately as soon as you define an admin within a community plus or partner thing, and essentially deleting any of the underlying users will kind of, technically you'll be prohibited from kind of deleting or deactivating the admin unless there is another admin available there. And there are, of course, different variations to mitigate that, but just idea that, you can't deactivate an admin while there's a user sitting out there. Remote system initiated, this is API based. When another system is deprovisioning you, again, a lot of people have the misconception that JIT handler can handle like a just-in-time deprovisioning. Of all the systems, I've personally maybe not seen any JIT handler deprovisioning within the system. A lot of this has to be based on API by using SOAP API. Okta and others have some kind of a synchronization mechanism where it also allows you for deprovisioning, but there's some configuration settings that you need to do. Another product that Salesforce provides that also allows for deprovisioning, but you need Microsoft Active Directory with it, is Identity Connect, which is their add-on product. It has a synchronization where deleting or disabling a user in Active Directory synchronizes the activation and deactivation method within Salesforce if you're using Identity Connect. And then when it comes to self-deactivation, it is only for external users via community access. So, the community users, because they could be a large volume, they could be essentially deactivating themselves, and have that capability. Internal users can't deactivate themselves. They will definitely kind of, request the admins and others, because there are so many other considerations, as you know, in the left side, which ownership transfers and other things that they need to do. Where do you begin? By the way, I only scratched the surface, and I've been very diligent about just scratching the surface, because we're already close to our time to finish this session. And hence I was saying, like, the level of detail that you need, is a different session altogether for each of the stages. But where do you begin? Here are the 10 questions that you want to start as an architect and ask, which will really address and start exploring your 9 stages of identity and access management. The first one, which users need access to Salesforce, and are they internal or external? This goes back to the user type, and it refers to the user account management. The second one, how will internal and external users be provisioned within Salesforce? This is talking about provisioning. What mechanisms are you using? The third one, how will users be authenticated? Authentication. Is Salesforce the identity provider or service provider? Depending on what Salesforce is considering itself, or you are considering Salesforce to be, you have an external identity provider that has to talk to Salesforce as a service provider. What does that flow looks like, and how do you configure some of these attributes around IDP initiated versus SP initiated flow? The number 5 is, do users need access to multiple systems using a single authentication authorization method? SSO, right there. Multiple systems, keyword, SSO. The sixth one, once user or system have access to Salesforce, what can they do? See, this is the access definition I was talking about. You need to carefully kind of identify all of that, ensure that that's part of your entire access definition, specification, or scope, and ensure that every element of the access visibility and sharing is thought through. The next one, when a user logs out, where should they be redirected? Should it be to like google.com, or should it be back to a login page, or should they just be sitting there wondering like what's going on? So you have to kind of think through a lot of that, right? And when user access is disabled or locked, how do they regain access to Salesforce, right? This is again related to the logout recovery. How do you do that, and all that kind of stuff? And the last one is, how will users be deprovisioned in the system, and what are the repercussions and impact of that, which is related to the story of deprovisioning and how you're planning the deprovisioning capabilities within Salesforce. These are just the initial 10 questions that you start with. And of course, everything has a double click underneath that you will go into detail and so forth. And you will say, DJ, this is all great. And you really kind of gave me a high level of what I already knew. But my intent was to really create a framework for you of how you want to think architecturally. In terms of the details, my high recommendation would be this book, that is the Salesforce Architect's Handbook. It's not just about identity and access management. It's about all Salesforce architecture holistically in designing an end-to-end solution, and identity and access management is a chapter within it. But beyond that, it also has integration architecture, data architecture, how do you set up your DevOps, application design, programmatic versus configuration versus which licenses to apply, what to do, the visibility and sharing, the 16 that I mentioned, as well as like what are the key considerations when to use that, mobile architecture, and many more, right? I would highly recommend this, but also not because of just that. It was just a labor of love and work. And also just to let everybody know, 100% of all proceeds that me and Jim have received from this so far have all gone to the charity, St. Jude's Children's Hospital. We didn't write this book for money. We wrote this book for the community to start as a basis and a framework for architecture design intelligence across Salesforce environment. With that said, I want to say thank you, gracias, shukriya, merci, spasibo, that's my Russian, gekuyo, arigato, and khub dhonnobad. Thank you. Amit, I'll turn it over to you for any questions.
First of all, Dipankar, thank you so much. This is really great session and really helpful. And I hope our audience also enjoyed. So guys, if you have any question, feel free to ask. Let me allow you to unmute yourself so that you can ask your question directly with Dipankar. So feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question.
Hey, Deepankar.
Yeah.
Hey, that's awesome, man. You explained one full chapter from your book. I'm having the book in your hand. I didn't expect. I'm sorry, somehow I could not relate your name to the face. I was reading the book, and when you started that, it's awesome. Thank you so much. That's like, I don't know how many of others would know the value of your